Margaret Collins had spent a lifetime building the foundation of her family, quietly, steadily, and with unwavering devotion. From the creaking floors of their old house to the worn kitchen table where her children once huddled for breakfast, every corner held a memory she cherished. She had sacrificed dreams, ambitions, and even friendships to raise her 3 children, Elizabeth, Michael, and Sophie. But now, in the waning days of her life, Margaret found herself sitting alone in the grand living room, the silence of the house heavier than any company could be. Her frail hands trembled as she reached for the phone, dialing Elizabeth's number for what felt like the 100th time that week. The line clicked, ringing into voicemail. Again. And again. The messages she left were laced with quiet desperation, a plea for a visit, a simple check-in, anything that might remind her she wasn't forgotten. But the phone remained silent, much like the cold replies she got from Michael and Sophie. They had grown distant, not just in miles but in heart. What Margaret didn't yet fully realize was the reason behind their absence. While she lay in bed at night, battling the aches and the loneliness, her children were plotting in the shadows. They had seen her vulnerability as a doorway, not for reconciliation or care, but as an opportunity to seize what they believed was theirs by birthright: her wealth, her home, her legacy. It started subtly, with Elizabeth suggesting the sale of the family's beloved cottage by the lake, the place where Margaret had once taken her children fishing, teaching them to cast nets and catch streams. "It's just too much upkeep for Mom," Elizabeth argued over a tense family dinner, her voice coated in faux concern. Michael, ever the shrewd businessman, nodded in agreement. Sophie, the youngest and most fragile of the 3, remained quiet, her eyes darting nervously as she sided with her siblings. But Margaret saw through the facade. The sparkle in their eyes was not of concern but of calculation. They talked over her, dismissed her wishes, and made decisions without even a hint of hesitation. The financial advisors were called in without her knowledge, the bills were quietly shifted, and her savings began to drain faster than she could keep track. Her protests were met with excuses. "You're confused, Mom. You don't remember things the way you used to." It was a lie she hated to believe, but the weariness in her bones made her doubt herself. Still, every morning she woke up hoping that today would be different, that one of her children would knock on the door, offer her a smile, or hold her hand. Instead, she was met with silence and cold glances when they did appear. The children who once clung to her skirts in childhood now avoided her gaze like shadows afraid of the light. The house itself seemed to mourn with her. The portraits on the walls, once vibrant with the smiles of family gatherings, now felt like silent witnesses to a slow unraveling. The grand clock in the hallway ticked relentlessly, marking time that felt both endless and agonizingly brief. Margaret's health deteriorated, the doctors giving grim warnings, yet she held on to one hope: that her family's love would prevail over greed. She remembered the promises made at birthdays, weddings, and long-forgotten Sunday dinners. But hope was a fragile thread, and with each passing day, it frayed under the weight of betrayal. One rainy afternoon, as Margaret rested by the window, watching drops race down the glass, she overheard voices in the kitchen. Not the warm chatter she longed for, but hushed whispers filled with bitterness and calculation. "She's slipping away," Elizabeth said, voice sharp. "If we wait much longer, we lose everything." Michael's reply was colder still. "We can't let sentiment get in the way. The estate's at stake." Sophie's sobs were barely audible, but they cut deeper than any knife. "Mom deserves better than this." Margaret's heart clenched. She realized then that she was no longer a beloved mother, but a pawn in a ruthless game. Yet, beneath the despair, a flicker of resolve began to glow. Margaret was not one to surrender quietly. If her children thought they could take everything from her without consequence, they were gravely mistaken. The woman who had given them life was preparing to fight back, not with anger or violence, but with a cunning so sharp it would catch them off guard. The night settled over the house, thick and heavy. Margaret lay awake, the ceiling above a canvas for her swirling thoughts. Memories of laughter and love mingled with images of betrayal and greed. Her breath shallow but steady, she vowed that if her children would betray her in life, she would ensure her final act would be one that no one would forget. As the clock chimed midnight, Margaret began to plan her last move, one that would reveal who her children truly were and what legacy she would leave behind. The Grand Collins estate, once a sanctuary filled with warmth and laughter, had become a breeding ground for whispered secrets and fragile alliances. Behind the ornate doors and polished surfaces, Margaret's children wove a tangled web of manipulation and deceit, each vying for control over the vast fortune their mother had painstakingly amassed. Elizabeth, the eldest, wore the mask of the responsible daughter. Sharp, poised, and always impeccably dressed, she commanded the family gatherings with a steely calm that barely concealed her ruthless ambition. She had long cultivated an image of the devoted caregiver, the one who managed the household finances and made prudent decisions. But behind closed doors, her calculations were far more self-serving. In a dimly lit study, she sat across from Michael, her younger brother, who leaned back in his chair with a smirk that never reached his cold eyes. Michael was the wild card, a successful entrepreneur with a knack for risk and a heart hardened by years of feeling overshadowed by Elizabeth's control. "We need to act fast," Elizabeth urged, tapping her fingers on the mahogany desk. "Mom's health is declining. If we don't secure the estate soon, those damn lawyers will tie everything up in court for years." Michael chuckled darkly. "I like how you think, but we can't just bulldoze over Sophie. She's unpredictable, more sentimental than us. She might blow everything up if she senses what we're planning." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "Then she needs to be handled delicately. I'll keep her close, whisper the right things, make her think she's part of the plan." Meanwhile, Sophie, the youngest and once the sweethearted sibling, was a mess of conflicting emotions. She spent most days wandering the halls in a fragile haze, torn between loyalty to her mother and the growing fear that her siblings were exploiting the situation. Unlike Elizabeth and Michael, Sophie had stayed at home, caring for Margaret when she could, but even her love was tinged with doubt. One evening she sat in the dim kitchen, clutching a faded photograph of her mother with a whisper of a smile. The phone buzzed with messages from Elizabeth, sweet words, offers of help, invitations to meetings. But Sophie knew better. Each message was carefully crafted to keep her compliant, to silence her instincts. At night, Sophie confided in her journal, writing furiously about the cracks she saw in the family's facade. "They only want the money," she wrote, "not Mom. I'm scared I'm losing her. And maybe myself." Elsewhere, the siblings began to subtly sabotage each other. Elizabeth leaked false information about impending financial ruin to test Michael's reactions. Michael threatened to withhold key documents unless Elizabeth conceded to his demands. Sophie, increasingly isolated, found herself doubting who she could trust. Unseen by the siblings, Margaret's once trusted attorney, Mr. Caldwell, grew wary of their maneuvers. He had noticed the coldness in their visits, the veiled conversations, and the underlying greed that threatened to consume the family. He warned Margaret gently during their last meeting. "Your children are no longer united, Mrs. Collins. You must be cautious. This estate could become a battleground." Margaret nodded solemnly, her eyes sharp despite the frailty of her body. She understood now that her family was fractured beyond simple repair, but the cracks in their armor also revealed opportunities, weaknesses she could exploit if she played her cards right. The estate itself seemed to pulse with tension. The once vibrant garden was wilting, reflecting the decay of trust within the family. Even the housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, noticed the change. "They're like strangers in their own home," she whispered to a friend. "All this fighting, it's tearing them apart." Late one night, Elizabeth convened a secret meeting in her sleek downtown apartment. Michael arrived, his expression unreadable, while Sophie hesitated at the door, unsure whether to enter. "We have to finalize our strategy," Elizabeth said, pacing. "The will be read soon, and if we're not united, we'll lose everything." Michael shrugged. "Or we could just wait it out, let the lawyers sort the mess." "But I like your energy, Liz," Sophie finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Are you even thinking about Mom? Or just the money?" Elizabeth's gaze hardened. "Don't be naive, Sophie. This is how the world works. If you want to survive, you play the game." The room fell silent, the air thick with resentment and fear. As days passed, the siblings' secrets deepened. Elizabeth's late-night calls to dubious contacts, Michael's clandestine meetings with business rivals, and Sophie's whispered confessions to old friends all painted a picture of a family unraveling. Yet beneath it all, Margaret's presence lingered, a shadow watching, calculating, and waiting to reveal the truth behind these fractured relationships. The house had become a chessboard, and the players were preparing for a game with no mercy. Margaret sat quietly in the dimly lit study, the soft glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls, lined with leather-bound books and framed photographs of happier times. The scent of aged paper and ink filled the room as she signed her final will, a document unlike any her family had seen before. It was her last and most carefully crafted act, not just a legal declaration, but a calculated gambit designed to unmask and upend the greed festering within her own bloodline. For weeks she had worked with her trusted lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, to weave a clause so subtle, so cunning, that it would force her children to confront not only their inheritance but the truth about themselves. It was a will that held secrets, riddles, and a promise of revelation, a puzzle wrapped inside a legacy. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she placed her signature beneath the final paragraph. The words she had penned weren't merely about dividing assets. Instead, they hinted at conditions, challenges, and a mystery only solvable by those who could prove their worth beyond wealth. She knew her children would see the will as a treasure map, but only those with integrity would find the true prize. Her mind drifted back to the countless sacrifices she had made, the late nights caring for sick children, the birthdays she spent alone to keep the family afloat, the countless favors done without thanks. She had given them everything, but they had repaid her with silence, deception, and greed. This will was her last stand, her final lesson. Margaret's thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock on the door. Mr. Caldwell entered, his expression grave but respectful. "Mrs. Collins, this clause is unlike anything I've seen before. Are you certain you want to proceed?" She met his gaze steadily. "They need to learn that love isn't measured in dollars and loyalty isn't bought. This will is my final message." Over the following days, Margaret's health declined noticeably, but her spirit remained unbroken. The knowledge of her will's secret clause gave her quiet strength. It was a chess game, and she had set the pieces carefully, ready for the final moves. The will's language was deliberately vague on the surface, leaving her children and their advisors scrambling to interpret it. The estate was divided, but only conditionally. Access to the largest portion depended on solving a series of clues embedded in the document, clues that demanded insight into family history, personal integrity, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Word of the unusual will spread quickly once the attorneys were informed. The family gathered reluctantly, eyes wary, voices tight with suspicion. Elizabeth, Michael, and Sophie had no idea what awaited them, but the tension was palpable. They had each prepared themselves to claim their inheritance with ease, expecting a straightforward division of wealth. Instead, they faced something far more challenging. In the privacy of their own rooms, the siblings whispered theories, exchanged hushed conversations, and tried to guess what their mother might have hidden. Elizabeth insisted it was a test of intelligence, a legal labyrinth designed to weed out the weak. Michael believed it was a game of power, an invitation to a ruthless battle. Sophie, still torn between hope and despair, wondered if it was her mother's way of forcing them to reconcile. Yet none of them understood the true nature of Margaret's final move. It was not merely a contest for money, but a reckoning for their souls. Margaret's lawyer alone knew the full extent of the clause. bound by confidentiality but burdened by the weight of his client's resolve. He admired her tenacity, her refusal to allow her legacy to be sullied by greed. This will is her justice, he thought silently, a beacon for those who deserve it, and a warning for those who do not. As the reading day approached, Margaret felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and peace. She had done what she could, planted seeds of truth, justice, and revelation. Now it was up to her children to uncover the path she had laid before them. Her final will was more than a legal document. It was a mirror reflecting the fractures and flaws of a family forced to face their own darkness. Each clue, each condition, was designed to peel back layers of deceit and expose what had long been hidden beneath smiles and facades. That night, as she lay in bed, Margaret allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The game was set. The players were ready, and the truth, her truth, would soon come to light. The heavy oak doors of the Collins family mansion creaked open, admitting a procession of somber faces and stiff collars. The air was thick with unease, a mixture of grief and barely concealed tension. Margaret Collins had passed away quietly in the early hours of the morning, leaving behind a legacy far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Today was the day the family would gather to hear her final words, the reading of the will. In the grand drawing room, the children assembled, their expressions guarded. Elizabeth stood tall and composed, her eyes scanning the room with practiced control. Michael paced near the fireplace, fingers tapping impatiently against the marble mantel. Sophie lingered by a window, clutching a faded handkerchief, eyes heavy with sorrow and suspicion. Mr. Caldwell, Margaret's lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, the crisp rustle of papers breaking the heavy silence. "Thank you all for coming," he began. Mrs. Collins was clear in her wishes that this reading be handled with care and respect. However, the contents of the will are unconventional, and I ask for your patience as we proceed. The envelope was opened slowly, the seal broken, as if the very act might unleash a storm. As Mr. Caldwell began to read, the siblings listened intently, their faces unreadable masks. The opening lines detailed the division of assets, but with a twist. Each child's inheritance was conditional upon fulfilling a series of tasks laid out in the will. The estate, far from being divided simply by bloodline, was now a complicated puzzle. A murmur rippled through the room as Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure faltered for a brief moment. "Tasks? What kind of tasks?" she asked, voice sharp but controlled. Mr. Caldwell looked to her calmly. "Mrs. Collins designed the will to challenge you, to encourage reflection on your relationship with her and with each other. There are clues embedded within the document, puzzles that you must solve in order to access the full inheritance." Michael scoffed, folding his arms. "This is ridiculous. We're adults. She's dead. Why make this so complicated?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe it's her way of making us see what really matters." The lawyer continued, "In addition to the material assets, there are references to other, less tangible inheritances. Personal letters, secret locations, and historical documents that Mrs. Collins insisted must be found and understood. This is more than a legal process, it's a test of character." The siblings exchanged wary glances, unease settling like a cold fog. What was supposed to be a straightforward reading had morphed into a battlefield of suspicion and challenge. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath broke the tension. Mr. Caldwell unfolded an additional parchment, an addendum, handwritten by Margaret herself. His eyes scanned the text before he read aloud. "There is one final condition. Any attempt to contest or undermine this will result in immediate forfeiture of your share." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "So no legal battles then?" "Correct," the lawyer replied. Mrs. Collins wished to avoid the prolonged disputes that often destroy families. She wanted this to be resolved through understanding and, importantly, cooperation, if that is possible. The room grew heavy with unspoken accusations and thinly veiled threats. Michael's eyes gleamed with defiance. "Cooperation? I don't see how that's going to happen." Sophie looked down, biting her lip. "Maybe it's time we finally talk, really talk." The reading ended, but the real battle was just beginning. The siblings left the mansion with heavy hearts and heavier minds, burdened not only by their mother's death, but by the mysterious challenge she had left behind. As they retreated to their separate corners of the city, the first cracks appeared in their fragile unity. Elizabeth, ever the strategist, began planning with her trusted advisors how to decode the will's puzzles. Michael called a secret meeting with his business contacts, looking for an edge. Sophie, torn between hope and fear, reached out to an old family friend for guidance. Meanwhile, the household staff whispered anxiously about the sudden tension. Mrs. Thompson, who had cared for Margaret for decades, sighed deeply. "I've seen families torn apart before, but it's something else. Mrs. Collins wanted more than money to be inherited. I hope her children can see that before it's too late." Outside the Collins estate, the sky darkened with gathering clouds, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing within the family. The reading of the will had set in motion a chain of events no one could have foreseen. Secrets would unravel, loyalties would shatter, and truths long buried would claw their way to the surface. In the quiet aftermath, Margaret's final message echoed louder than ever. This was not just a contest for wealth, but a reckoning for the soul of her family. The day after the dramatic reading of Margaret's will, the Collins siblings found themselves plunged deeper into a labyrinth far darker and more twisted than any had imagined. The initial shock of the conditions gave way to a creeping dread when the estate's financial records and personal effects began to reveal secrets that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew about their mother and themselves. Elizabeth was the first to dive into the mountain of documents left behind by Margaret. She sat for hours in the mansion's expansive library, poring over ledgers, bills, and correspondence, determined to uncover any clues that would secure her inheritance. But what she found instead unsettled her. Hidden debts, some running into hundreds of thousands of dollars, quietly accumulated over the years. At first, she suspected a clerical error or mismanagement by the accountants. But as she dug deeper, the trail of these debts led to strange places: unexplained withdrawals, unpaid loans, and legal notices that had been carefully concealed from the family. It became clear Margaret had been struggling financially in ways none of her children had been told. Meanwhile, Michael confronted the estate's financial advisor with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "How could she let this happen? Why didn't anyone tell us?" he demanded. The advisor, an aging man with weary eyes, hesitated. Mrs. Collins was very private about her finances. She insisted on managing certain affairs herself, away from prying eyes. "I believe these debts were deliberate decisions. Investments gone wrong, perhaps, or attempts to protect assets from the very greed we see now." Sophie, who had been quietly following the siblings' frantic efforts, stumbled upon a sealed envelope hidden in a small box beneath her mother's old writing desk. Inside was a faded photograph and a letter, written in Margaret's unmistakable script. It was addressed to the one unknown. Her hands trembled as she read. The letter revealed the existence of a secret heir, a child Margaret had kept hidden for reasons she never explained. This revelation sent shockwaves through Sophie's heart. A half-sibling, a love child. The letter hinted at a person living far away, someone Margaret trusted to carry a part of her legacy. "I can't believe this," Sophie murmured to herself. The thought that there was someone else, someone outside the known family, waiting in the wings added a new layer of complexity and uncertainty. She knew this secret heir could potentially claim a share of the estate, disrupting the fragile balance the siblings were already fighting over. Word of the secret heir spread like wildfire when Sophie revealed the discovery to Elizabeth and Michael. Elizabeth's expression hardened. "This changes everything. We need to find out who this person is. And fast. If they have any claim, they could derail all our plans." Michael was more cynical. "Or they could be a myth, a distraction. Mom was clever enough to plant that, to keep us busy while she did something else." The search began in earnest. Elizabeth used her connections to trace Margaret's past, digging through public records and old acquaintances. Michael reached out to private investigators, determined to uncover the heir's identity before the estate's affairs spiraled out of control. Sophie, caught between hope and fear, wondered if this mysterious sibling was the key to healing their fractured family, or just another player in a cruel game. As days passed, more troubling details emerged. The hidden debts began to affect the estate's value, forcing the siblings to reconsider their expectations. Properties they thought were owned free and clear were tied up in liens. Investments Margaret had made in seemingly promising ventures had vanished or failed. The siblings realized their inheritance might not be the windfall they had dreamed of. Despite the growing tension, some among the family started to reflect on Margaret's possible motives. Had these debts been a test, a way to weed out the greedy, or perhaps a sacrifice she made to protect something greater? Mr. Caldwell, watching the unfolding chaos, remarked quietly to the family attorney. Mrs. Collins planned for every contingency. These debts, this secret heir, it's all part of the puzzle. Her last will was not just about what she leaves behind, but who deserves it. In the shadows of the Collins estate, the siblings faced a stark choice: unite to uncover the truth, or let suspicion and greed tear them apart. Each day brought new revelations but also deeper fractures. Margaret's carefully concealed secrets were no longer hidden. They clawed their way into the open, forcing everyone to confront the reality of a legacy far more complicated and far more human than simple inheritance. The family's battle for fortune had just become a battle for identity, trust, and survival. The days following the shocking revelations about hidden debts and a secret heir only deepened the tension among the Collins siblings. But the real challenge, the one Margaret had woven into her will with meticulous care, was just beginning. The cryptic clues and puzzles embedded in the document proved to be far more than mere riddles. They were a mirror reflecting the fractured past and strained relationships of the family. The will's language, initially appearing as straightforward legalese, now revealed hidden codes, veiled references, and obscure historical facts that demanded careful interpretation. Each clue seemed designed to force the siblings to confront their own failings and shared history, and no one could solve them alone. Elizabeth, always the strategist, saw the puzzle as a game of intellect and precision. She gathered stacks of papers, her laptop, and a collection of books on cryptography and local history. Night after night, she sat by the fireplace, scrawling notes and drawing connections, determined to unlock the secrets that would secure her future. Michael, skeptical and hot-headed, dismissed much of Elizabeth's approach as overthinking. Instead, he took a more brute force method, hiring codebreakers and private investigators, throwing money at the problem in hopes of forcing the clues to reveal themselves. Yet even with all the resources at his disposal, frustration gnawed at him. The puzzles seemed to slip further away each time he thought he was close. Sophie, caught between the siblings' conflict and her own doubts, sought a more emotional approach. She spent hours in the family home, revisiting old letters, diaries, and mementos Margaret had left behind. For her, the clues were not just intellectual challenges, but keys to understanding their mother's true feelings, the love, the pain, and the betrayals she had endured. The first major breakthrough came unexpectedly. Hidden within the wording of a seemingly innocuous clause was an anagram that pointed to a location on the estate, an old greenhouse, long abandoned and forgotten. When Elizabeth, Michael, and Sophie finally ventured there together, the atmosphere was thick with unease and anticipation. Inside the dusty greenhouse, beneath a loose floorboard, they found a small metal box. Its surface was etched with strange symbols and a complex lock, the kind that required not just a key, but knowledge of the family's history and the will's cryptic references to open. The discovery ignited a fragile alliance among the siblings. Despite their bitterness and suspicion, they recognized that working together was the only way forward. But old wounds and grievances simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. Opening the box proved a challenge in itself. Elizabeth's careful decoding of the symbols, combined with Sophie's knowledge of family lore, slowly unlocked the mechanism. Inside, they found letters, photographs, and a small leather-bound journal belonging to Margaret. The journal was a revelation, a deeply personal account of Margaret's life, filled with reflections, regrets, and stories she had never shared. It detailed not only her sacrifices, but also the painful betrayals she had suffered, including secrets about her children's past actions that none of them had known. Reading the journal forced the siblings to confront truths they had long avoided. The puzzles in the will were not just about money or power. They were about reckoning with the past, acknowledging faults, and seeking forgiveness. But the journal also hinted at further challenges ahead. Margaret had left more clues, each more intricate and demanding than the last, scattered throughout the estate and tied to moments from their childhood. It was a labyrinth of memory and mystery, designed to push them to their limits. As they delved deeper, tensions flared. Michael accused Elizabeth of manipulating the clues to her advantage. Elizabeth countered, questioning Michael's motives and loyalty. Sophie pleaded for peace, reminding them that their mother's wish was for them to come together, not fall apart. Their emotional turmoil mirrored the complexity of the puzzles themselves. Each step forward was shadowed by mistrust, and every revelation carried the weight of pain and regret. Meanwhile, the secret heir's potential claim loomed like a dark cloud over the entire process. Was the heir among them, hidden in plain sight? Or was this another mystery Margaret had left to unravel? Outside the mansion, neighbors and family friends whispered about the ongoing drama. The Collins estate, once a symbol of stability and legacy, was now a battlefield of secrets and shattered trust. Margaret's final game had taken its toll. The siblings were no longer just heirs fighting for an inheritance. They were players in a complex drama of love, betrayal, and redemption. And as the puzzles grew more demanding, the stakes rose higher. Each clue brought them closer to the ultimate truth, but also closer to the point of no return. As the Collins siblings delved deeper into Margaret's cryptic will, what had started as a fragile truce rapidly unraveled into a vicious battlefield of suspicion, resentment, and greed. The once tenuous cooperation shattered, replaced by bitter rivalries that threatened to consume not just their inheritance, but the family itself. At first, Elizabeth's calculated leadership had held the siblings together. Her meticulous approach to the puzzles and clues gave Michael and Sophie a reason to follow along, if only reluctantly. But cracks soon appeared. Every victory Elizabeth claimed was met with cold stares and whispered accusations from Michael, who saw her as manipulative and self-serving. "You think you can control everything, don't you?" Michael snapped one evening, slamming a stack of papers down on the dining room table. "But this isn't your game alone. You don't get to decide who wins." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, voice icy. "I'm doing what's necessary. If you spent less time scheming and more time thinking, you'd understand." Sophie tried to mediate, but the strain was too great. "Can't we just focus on the clues? Mom wanted us to work together." Their words hung in the air, brittle and fragile, as old wounds festered beneath the surface. Each sibling was consumed by a growing paranoia, fearful that the others might betray them to gain an edge. Elizabeth double-checked every document, suspecting Michael of tampering. Michael hired a private investigator to monitor Elizabeth's movements. Sophie, caught in the middle, grew increasingly isolated and anxious. The turning point came when a crucial clue went missing: an ancient family locket with a hidden compartment that contained a key to one of Margaret's puzzles. The locket had been in Sophie's possession, but it disappeared overnight. Fingers pointed immediately to Elizabeth and Michael, both of whom denied involvement vehemently. "This is exactly what Mom warned us about," Sophie said, tears brimming in her eyes. "The greed. It's destroying us," Elizabeth accused Michael with cutting venom. "You're trying to sabotage us all. You can't win this honestly, so you resort to theft?" Michael shot back. "At least I'm not playing puppet master like you." Their bitter exchanges echoed through the halls of the Collins estate, as the once proud siblings became enemies. Old alliances shattered under the weight of mistrust, replaced by plots to outwit and outmaneuver each other. Amid the chaos, secret alliances formed in shadows. Elizabeth quietly aligned herself with a longtime family lawyer, hoping to use legal leverage. Michael conspired with some of Margaret's old business associates, promising favors in exchange for information. Sophie, desperate to salvage something of the family she loved, reached out to the secret heir, hoping for a new ally, but found only guarded wariness. The greed that had lain dormant in their hearts now consumed them fully, breeding paranoia and fear. Every gesture was scrutinized, every word dissected for hidden meaning. Surveillance cameras were installed, phones tapped, and private meetings held behind locked doors. Margaret's carefully designed game had become a poison, seeping into their lives and twisting their minds. One night, Elizabeth discovered a series of threatening notes slipped under her bedroom door, warnings to stop meddling or face consequences. She showed the notes to Michael, who responded with a bitter laugh. "Now we're being threatened? Seems the stakes just got higher." As the threats escalated, so did the risks. Suspicious accidents occurred: an overturned car, a mysterious fire in a storage room filled with documents. The family estate itself felt like a cage, trapping them in a nightmare of their own making. Neighbors whispered of the Collins siblings' fall from grace. Friends began to distance themselves. And through it all, Margaret's presence loomed, a haunting reminder that this was her final lesson, a reckoning for the years of betrayal and neglect. In a rare moment of clarity, Sophie confronted her siblings. "Look at what this is doing to us. This isn't just about money anymore. We're losing ourselves, our family." Elizabeth's eyes flashed with pain. "It's too late for that now." Michael's voice was cold. "Maybe that's the point." The siblings stood at a crossroads. Could they overcome the poison of greed and paranoia, or were they doomed to destroy each other as Margaret had feared? Outside the Collins estate, the autumn wind swept through the barren trees, carrying with it the chilling promise of more secrets and more betrayals yet to come. The storm had been building for weeks, unspoken suspicions, fractured alliances, greed masquerading as grief. Now, it broke. The Collins siblings had long passed the point of no return. They had turned on each other, clawing through memories and lies, like wolves fighting over the bones of a once proud legacy. But in Margaret's masterful orchestration, the next stage of the game wasn't just about clever clues or hidden keys, it was about truth, cold, brutal, and unrelenting. And it began with a videotape. Sophie found it buried in the back of Margaret's armoire, tucked beneath a false bottom with the words, "For when the mask cracks," scrawled in Margaret's handwriting. Intrigued and fearful, she gathered her siblings against her better judgment and inserted the tape into the dusty old player in the study. The screen flickered, and there she was, Margaret. Pale, gaunt, but resolute. Her voice was quiet, but every word cut with surgical precision. "If you're watching this," she said, "then the truth has begun to surface. What you find next may ruin you or free you. But know this: every betrayal you've tried to hide, I already knew." Elizabeth shifted uneasily in her chair. Michael's jaw tightened. The video ended, not with instructions, but with coordinates. An old storage unit on the outskirts of town, rented under a name none of them recognized. Michael insisted on going alone. Elizabeth and Sophie objected, but he brushed them off. "This is just more theater. I'll handle it." What Michael found inside would unravel the final threads of their already fraying sanity. The storage unit held dozens of files. Margaret had been keeping secrets of her own, painstaking records of her children's lives. Bank transfers, photos, phone logs. Some were decades old. Michael leafed through the papers and found one labeled with his name in large, red letters. His face drained of color. It detailed a business deal he'd buried long ago, one where he had quietly sold off a piece of the family company to cover his gambling debts, forging Margaret's signature to do it. He had always believed he got away clean, but Margaret had known. She had let him believe he escaped, only to keep this knowledge as a card to be played when it would hurt most. Worse still was the folder marked Elizabeth. When she finally saw it, after Michael, reluctantly and red-faced, returned with the files, Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure shattered. The documents revealed she had manipulated their father's medication during his final illness. Subtle changes, nothing traceable, but enough to hasten his decline. Not out of cruelty, but calculation. She wanted to prevent him from changing the will in their mother's favor after discovering an affair. Elizabeth fell silent. There was no excuse, only shame. But it was Sophie's folder that brought tears, not just to her eyes, but to everyone's. Her betrayal was one of silence. She had known of Margaret's financial collapse, but had chosen to do nothing. Afraid of being dragged down, she had distanced herself, all while pretending to care. Her guilt had eaten at her in private for years, but she had never confessed. Margaret had documented it all, not just facts and timelines, but reflections, pages of handwritten observations. I raised them with love, but they learned survival. I gave them everything, and still they took more. The siblings sat in stunned silence. The air was thick with the weight of revelation. No more accusations, no more games, only raw, unfiltered truth. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the Collins estate grew colder. No one could look the others in the eye without remembering the sins that had been unearthed. The estate, once a symbol of legacy and privilege, now felt like a mausoleum of their moral decay. Michael drank more. Elizabeth retreated into icy detachment. Sophie wandered the halls at night, whispering apologies to a mother who would never answer. They had come to claim wealth. Instead, they had unearthed rot. Margaret had orchestrated this, not just to punish, but to expose, to make her children see each other as they truly were, stripped of performance and pretense. And in doing so, she ensured that even in death, she would be remembered, not just as a matriarch, but as a woman who refused to let her legacy be corrupted by lies. The siblings were left not just with fewer illusions, but with fewer places to hide. Because the truth wasn't just in the documents, it was in the mirror. And now, there was only one question left to answer. Would they finally change, or would they destroy each other completely before Margaret's final card was played? The house was quieter now. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but subdued, like the air after a storm where the sky still hangs heavy and bruised. The Collins siblings, once so certain of their entitlement, now wandered the halls of their childhood home like ghosts burdened by the past. Margaret's will, once viewed as a formality, had become something else entirely: a gauntlet, a confessional booth, and, most of all, a final judgment. In the days since the dark truths had been unearthed, each betrayal, each secret, laid bare, Elizabeth, Michael, and Sophie moved as if under a spell. The luxurious estate no longer felt like an inheritance. It was a monument to their mother's vengeance. Yet vengeance was too simple a word for what Margaret had done. This wasn't punishment, it was design. The final envelope arrived without fanfare, delivered not by courier or lawyer, but by post, addressed in Margaret's elegant handwriting. Inside was a single note. The final clause is now active. The estate remains unclaimed. One must choose truth. The others will walk away with nothing. Justice requires sacrifice. Beneath the note, a key. No explanation, no map, just one last test. They debated its meaning in hushed, wary voices. "A bluff," Michael muttered, pacing the study. "She's trying to divide us again." Elizabeth sat by the window, clutching the key as if it might vanish. "Or she's offering redemption to one of us. The rest lose everything." Sophie looked from one sibling to the other. "But how do you choose who deserves it?" That was the poison buried inside Margaret's final act. The will now demanded a decision. Only one of them could inherit. But to do so, they would have to prove their worth, not by claiming innocence, but by confronting their guilt. The estate attorney, summoned once more to interpret the clause, confirmed the impossible truth. Margaret had left behind an irrevocable final provision. The entirety of her fortune, assets, land, accounts, would go to the one sibling who willingly accepted full legal and moral accountability for the damage done to the family. That meant confessing publicly, signing a legal affidavit accepting responsibility. It was humiliation, it was moral crucifixion, and it was the only way forward. Michael exploded. "She's turned this into a sick game. What kind of mother?" Elizabeth cut him off, her voice low but sharp. "A mother who was tired of being used. One who wanted to see if any of us had the courage to face what we've become." Sophie said nothing, but something inside her had changed. While her siblings fell into fury and calculation, she began writing. A letter. Then another. And another. She sent apologies to Margaret's old friends, to caretakers she had ignored, to people she had wronged through silence or inaction. Days passed. Then Sophie did something neither Elizabeth nor Michael expected. She signed the affidavit. She walked into the attorney's office, trembling but resolute, and claimed full responsibility, not just for her silence during Margaret's decline, but for her complicity in the decay of the family. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't expect to be believed. She only wanted to stop pretending. The legal wheels began to turn. Sophie, by choosing truth, had become the heir. Michael was livid. "She's manipulating the system, playing the martyr." Elizabeth, for once, didn't argue. She just sat in the drawing room, staring out the window, remembering their mother's voice on the videotape. The way Margaret had looked not angry, but heartbroken. That night, Elizabeth slipped a letter under Sophie's door. Not an apology, but acknowledgement. "You did what I couldn't. I still don't know if I hate you for it or admire you. Maybe both." Michael left the estate days later, bitter and broken. The world outside had no place for him now that the legacy he counted on had vanished. Elizabeth stayed longer, silent and thoughtful, until one morning she packed her bags and disappeared, with no goodbye, only a neatly filed resignation from any claim on the estate. Sophie remained. The Collins estate stood quieter than ever, not empty, but no longer crowded by shadows. Sophie didn't redecorate. She didn't sell. She restored. The garden, Margaret, once tended by hand, began to bloom again. She opened parts of the estate for community use. Margaret's charity, long defunct, was re-established in her name. Was it justice or revenge? Perhaps both. Margaret's final move had forced her children to confront the rot within. One had chosen truth, two had walked away. And the legacy? It was no longer just money or property. It was transformation. But the final twist still lingered. One more truth buried, waiting to rise. And Sophie could feel it coming. For weeks, Sophie lived in a strange quiet. Not peace. Peace implies stillness. This was different. It was a hum in the background, like a whisper in the walls, like the estate itself was holding its breath. Margaret had orchestrated a masterwork. Her will had not merely divided an inheritance, it had dismantled an illusion. Her children, who thought they understood her, who believed they had power, had been unmasked one by one. And now, only Sophie remained in the home they once fought over, the reluctant heiress to a fortune wrapped in sorrow. But just as Sophie began to accept her new role, the final twist revealed itself, not as an announcement, but as a quiet knock at the door. She opened it to find a woman, mid-30s, modestly dressed with Margaret's eyes. "My name is Clara." The name meant nothing, but the resemblance chilled Sophie's blood. "I think I'm your sister." Sophie blinked. "I'm sorry?" Clara reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope, legal documents, a sealed letter, and a photograph. Sophie stared at the photo. A young Margaret, pregnant and radiant, beside a man no one in the family had ever seen. "She gave me up," Clara said, "when she was very young, before she married your father." Sophie sat down hard on the nearest chair. Clara continued, "I got this a week ago, from a lawyer in another state. Apparently, Margaret arranged everything in secret. I wasn't supposed to come forward unless the will's final clause was activated." Sophie opened the sealed letter with trembling hands. It was from Margaret. "If you are reading this, it means one of my children chose truth over entitlement, and for that, they deserve to know the full story. You have a sister. Her name is Clara. She is my firstborn. I made mistakes. I was scared. I was forced to give her up because I thought it would ruin everything I was trying to build. And then I spent my life trying to be the mother she never had, to you, to Elizabeth, to Michael. Maybe that's why I forgave too much. Maybe that's why I let too many things slide. But I never stopped thinking about her. The truth is, the inheritance was never just yours. It was always meant to be shared with the one I left behind. You can hate me, but if you want to break the chain of betrayal, you must choose to let her in." Sophie stared at the letter, her mind spinning. Margaret's entire final act had not just been about retribution, it was about restoration. She hadn't just wanted justice for herself, she had wanted to make things right for the daughter she abandoned, and the daughter who remained. Clara sat in silence, watching her. She didn't ask for money, she didn't plead, she simply waited. And in that moment, Sophie understood the full weight of Margaret's plan. The puzzles, the betrayals, the humiliation. It had all led to this. A test not of who could win, but of who could let go. Of who could love again, despite everything. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. "You're not a stranger," she said. "You're family, and you're home now." The estate changed after that, not just in structure but in spirit. Clara moved in, not as a guest, but as an heir. Together, she and Sophie turned Margaret's legacy into something alive. They established a foundation, not in Margaret's name, but in honor of what she had fought for: accountability, reconciliation, and truth. Michael, adrift in his bitterness, never returned. Elizabeth, years later, sent a letter, not seeking inclusion, but offering forgiveness. Perhaps Margaret's greatest gift was forcing us to see what we are, and what we might still become. The Collins name, once synonymous with privilege and polished appearances, came to represent something else entirely. In the years that followed, people didn't speak of the family for their scandals, but for their remarkable transformation. The will that once tore them apart had become the cornerstone of their rebirth. And in the attic, untouched until that final spring, Sophie and Clara found one last envelope hidden in Margaret's handwriting. It read simply, "You broke the cycle." They stood in silence, the two sisters who should have never met, reading those words through tears. Margaret hadn't just written a will. She had written a redemption arc, one her children had to live through to understand. And in the end, her legacy wasn't the wealth she left behind. It was the truth she dared them to face, and the family they finally became.